Jamal, are we set? Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It is a treat to be here with you and to be here with Judy Woodruff and Al Hunt. My name is Ledley Laughlin. For those of you I have not yet had the pleasure to meet, I'm the rector here, and I'm glad you're here with us for this conversation. And by way of an introduction, I'm not going to tell you much about the remarkable and distinguished careers of these two individuals, of Judy Woodruff, who has been senior correspondent, former anchor, managing editor of the PBS NewsHour, has covered every presidential election since 1976, and spent the past year and a half traveling the country, talking with ordinary Americans, trying to understand what has us so politically divided, and sharing those stories as she learns them with the NewsHour on under the line of America at a Crossroads. Or of Al Hunt, who has been columnist and editor with Bloomberg News and senior bureau chief and executive editor at the Wall Street Journal, who has publications with Brookings, has been teaching. He's entering now his 25th year teaching a course at Penn. And for the inside scoop, I commend to you his current podcast, Politics War Room, with James Carville. Occasionally a little racy, but oh so smart.
It's him, not me.
Yeah, oh, it's him, yes. But what I do want to tell you is that Al and Judy became members of St. Columba's about 40 years ago, and that they are the parents of 3 beautiful children, now grown, Jeffrey, Benjamin, and Lauren, now Hemi. Each of whom spent time in the life of St. Columba's, and that you are as likely to see Al and Judy in We Worship these days with their grandchild Kai, and that in our conversations together, what shines through is your warmth and your thoughtfulness and your generosity as you have traversed the high peaks and low valleys of faith and life's hardships and joys. Judy and Al, thank you for being here. We look forward to conversation with you. So, to you, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ledley. Thank you.
Judy's going to start as she should, but I just had one thought as I sat down. I just hope my mom is looking down and saying, all those times I made him go to Sunday schools paid off.
I knew you were going to add that. Al and I are so pleased to be here with all of you this morning. We were really honored when Ledley asked us to come speak with you on one Sunday. I'm going to say a little bit about the project I've been working on for the last year and a half plus, traveling around the country. And then Al's going to speak from his standpoint as a reporter, commentator, columnist for many years. He's covered American politics going back to 1965. 72. In any event, what I decided to do is I knew I was stepping away from the anchor desk at the end of 2022. I knew I was going to keep working, keep reporting, and the thing that I most wanted to focus on was to try to understand where we are as a country and why the American people seem to be so divided right now, not just politically, but culturally and in many ways personally. So we launched this project, as Ledley mentioned, America at a Crossroads. We started in early 2023, and since then we've been to more than 25 states. We've been to, I have stopped counting, we've done 43 reports for the NewsHour, airing every other Wednesday night. We aired a special at the end of 2023, and just last Monday, we aired an hour-long town hall that we recorded in Milwaukee with Wisconsin residents across the political spectrum. And I had interviewed them the week before, not so much to talk to them about Trump and Harris, but to try to understand our differences, to try to understand how we view people on the other side, how this divide is affecting us personally, what the main points of division are, and whether we think we can find a way through this. And so these are many of the very same questions I've been asking people across the country. We started, I have to say, giving credit to the Pew Research Center. I just ran into someone here who works at Pew, and thank you for your amazing work, research. And they, in many ways, laid the groundwork for what we're doing, because they confirmed that in the last 30 years, Americans have become more divided on the principal issues that we address as Americans: the role of government, spending, issues like immigration, like abortion, and the environment. So if Americans were here about 25, 30 years ago, if we were this far apart, now, and this is very rough, we're this far apart. So it's not only that, though, that's going on. It is that in the last 8 to 10 years in particular, we have grown to have darker views of people on the other side. There was a survey that Pew did in 2016 where they asked people, what do you think, if you're a Democrat, what do you think of people who are Republicans? And they asked questions like, do you think they are honest, moral, immoral, those kinds of questions. Do you think just 8 or 10 different questions. And I'll just cite one of them. In 2016, 43% of Republicans said they thought most Democrats were immoral. 2023, move forward 7 years, 72% of Republicans said they thought most Democrats are immoral. There was a similar increase in the part of attitudes or views of Democrats, of people in the Republican Party. It wasn't quite as much of an increase. The more negative views, if you will, do fall on the Republican side, but there's still just a striking increase. This has happened in a relatively short period of time, and we see it reflected in the way we turn on the news. It's what we hear, it's what we feel. And so we've been traveling around the country. One of the places, and I can't begin to cite even some of the highlights, so I'm just going to mention a few. I wanted to go to the place where I was born, Tulsa, Oklahoma, to try to understand this city, which 100 years earlier was the site of a horrible massacre of black Americans in the so-called Greenwood District, Black Wall Street, they called it, where the white citizens of Tulsa went in and literally massacred scores of people. For many years, for decades, Tulsa buried that history, didn't talk about it. Today, and in the last few years, it's begun to come out. Today, Tulsa, with a young Republican mayor, is trying to find middle ground. He's dealing with a very conservative community, a group called Moms for Liberty that agrees with the Oklahoma legislature that you shouldn't be allowed to talk about race, the history of slavery in America, in ways that would make children, and especially white children, although that's not in the language of the legislation, feel guilty in any way about what happened 100 years ago or at any time during the history of this country. And on the other hand, he's dealing with a black community that understandably feels they've been treated unfairly, have been deeply economically and culturally disadvantaged because of what happened. And he's tried to find middle ground, tried to unearth much of the history of that. We talked to people on both sides. We talked to the mayor. He is keeping at it, if you will, but he's dealing with a very, very divided community. We went to the state of Oregon, where many of the folks who live in the eastern part of the state say they want to secede and join Idaho. There's what's called the Greater Idaho Movement. They feel that Portland, the capital city, and the state legislature doesn't in any way represent their views. They are divided. We looked at the role of in the Hispanic community, how many people believe most Hispanics vote, quote, Democratic. It's not the case at all anymore. We went to Phoenix, to the Phoenix suburbs, interviewed a gentleman who had come to the United States from Cuba, who was a huge Trump supporter, is very much against what he calls illegal immigration, says these folks have streaming across the border, taking over the country. We interviewed another immigrant, a woman from Mexico, whose family, she's been here for decades, her family, who very much thinks the United States is the beaconing place that welcomes immigrants. They're both Hispanic. They have completely different political views. We looked at the role of a number of things. We looked at, as I mentioned, we looked at immigration. We looked at the role of the media and how today so much of cable television is all about the fight, the disagreement between right and left. We interviewed two women who they live in the same community, but one of them watches MSNBC all day long, the other one watches Fox, has it on in the background all day long, and that is their worldview, and they really just have strong feelings about people on the other side. We went to the panhandle of Texas, where we were able to look at how the collapse of local journalism across the country is contributing to polarization. How? Because with the collapse of thousands and thousands of newspapers at the community level across this country and in big cities, there, as you know, many of them are just a shadow of what they were before. People no longer know what's going on in their community. They're not reading about not just candidates for office, but they don't know who lives there and what's happening to them. I interviewed several members of the community, very conservative politically. One gentleman, a rancher who'd been there, his family had been there for generations, had tears in his eyes as he talked about the folding, the disappearance of the town is called Canadian. It's Canadian, Texas. And the newspaper was the Canadian Recorder. He had tears in his eyes saying, this is a newspaper that told me about, I could see my children and my grandchildren high school football games. I could read about the birth, marriages, and deaths, people we knew in the community. You knew when there was a crime spree, and we heard, not that they have much crime, but they have a little bit. This is a newspaper editor who identified a traffic stop where there were too many accidents, and she lobbied to get the county commission to put a stoplight up. All kinds of little stories like that bring a community together. This is gone, and this is true across America. It's not just happening in the rural panhandle of Texas. We went, and just one other story I'll mention, and I'll mention the town hall. We went to Tennessee, where a year after a terrible school shooting in Nashville, at a Christian school, 6 people had been killed, 4 of them school children, 9 years old. There was an attempt by a group of Tennesseans to bring in an outside so-called bridging group called Starts With Us to try to find a way to find some consensus in this state that is very divided over gun laws, to think about how do we reduce gun violence. And they brought this group in, and they identified Tennesseans all the way from far on the left, for example, and we interviewed them, a few women who were teachers at a school, not at the school where the shootings had happened, but they knew of children who had died as a result of gun violence. They identified these women, put them in the group, and they also had strong advocates of the Second Amendment. One man owns a shooting range in rural Tennessee, big advocate of the Second Amendment, believes in gun rights. Put these people together. There were 11 of them. They call them the Tennessee 11. They spent days hammering out a set of what they believed were middle ground. And the most, I would say, the most controversial of their proposals was a proposal to make it possible to take guns away from people who had a mental health issue. They presented these recommendations to the Tennessee State Legislature. They couldn't even get enough members, it's a very Republican-dominated legislature, to even sit and in a briefing for what they had put together. So this was, again, all the way from the right to the left. They had spent time hammering this out, and they were open to other ideas, but the legislators were not even willing to sit down. So you come away with, you hear about this, and we talked to the gun rights advocates at length. The gentleman who owns a shooting range, I sat with him at the shooting range, where he talked about how discouraged he was, because he said, I got to know people on the other side. I understand if you live in inner city Memphis, you have a different view of a gun than me, someone who lives in rural Tennessee, where we view a gun as something that keeps us safe. You have to come away discouraged from that. But then at this town hall in Milwaukee, people, again, across the political spectrum, but many of them told us they want to see us come together. They would like to find common ground. Yes, they have principles they believe in, and they talked about everything from LGBTQ, reproductive rights, abortion, immigration, but they still were open at least to the idea of coming together. So when people ask me if I'm more hopeful or I'm more discouraged, my answer is always both, because
why is she looking at me?
You have to, you can't be feeling uplifted about some of these situations we face, and yet I know there is a will on the part of many Americans to put the noise aside and frankly the modeling on the part of our political leaders that is all about division and hating the other side. Many Americans are tired of that, and they want to find a way through it. And so we've been doing this for 2 years. Right now we're in the process of figuring out if we could continue it for 1 more year. But I have to say, for me, it's been a blessing to be able to get outside of Washington and to be able to travel the country and talk to Americans in small towns and rural areas and big cities. We've been to inner city Chicago to meet Americans where they live and to hear from them directly. It's been such a privilege for me. And now I'm going to turn it over to my husband, who thinks about this election every day, all day long.
Let me start off by asking, how many people here really care a lot about the outcome of this election? You don't have to. Okay. I've got some disturbing news for you. You're going to be nervous every day for the next 37 days. This is a very, very tight election, a very close election. I would rather have Kamala Harris's hand than Donald Trump's. I'll explain why in a bit, but this is not a foregone conclusion by any means. The other thing I'll say is that I think everything that Judy has found and reported on and discovered in that just fascinating series she's done for 2 years, the tensions, the divide, this election is making them worse. Sometimes elections can elevate you, but this one is not one that is doing that. The other thing I ask you, how many people here, because you care a lot, look at polls? Well, I'm going to save you some time. Don't look at a national poll. Seriously, don't. I don't care what CBS says, who's ahead, or NBC has somebody ahead. There are only really probably 7 states that matter. And with our system, whether we like it or not, the Electoral College, this election is going to come down to who's winning Nevada and Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, and then the so-called blue wall of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. I also don't believe the conventional wisdom that was certainly proven true in 2016 that the Republicans have some kind of a lock on the Electoral College. They really don't. And if I were to pick two states that I think are the most important to watch, it would be Pennsylvania and North Carolina. I think that Pennsylvania, which I'm sure you recall, Trump won in an upset by 40,000 votes in 2016, and then Biden won by 80,000 votes in 2020. One was less than 1%, and one was only about 1%. North Carolina has not gone Democratic since 2008, but the Democrats are more, I think, are better organized and better prepared this time. And they have another advantage, namely the Republicans running for statewide office down there. I'm sure you've read about the Republican gubernatorial candidate, Mark Robinson, who, if elected, would become the first black Nazi porn purveyor ever elected governor of North Carolina. He's not going to be. And he may not be the most bizarre, offensive candidate running for statewide office. The Republicans have someone running for head of state instruction, schools, education, who beat a conservative Republican in the primary. And this woman has advocated, you can't make this stuff up, I'm not making it up. She's advocated executing Barack Obama at Guantanamo, and that maybe we could put it on pay-per-view. Now, these people are crazy. And I don't think there's any chance they're going to win. But the question is, do we drag down the top of the ticket just a little bit? In North Carolina, there were 250,000 votes in the Republican primary for Nikki Haley after she had dropped out of the race. These are clearly Republicans who have problems or troubles or reservations with Donald Trump. What will they do on Election Day? Will they vote Democratic? Not very many. Some, maybe. Will they stay home? Maybe not a lot, but some. And in close election, North Carolina was decided by a little over 1 point last time, and it was the Democrats that had the scandal. They had a Senate candidate who was on his way to winning, and he got caught in a sex scandal a month before the election, and it just depressed the vote a little bit. So I think that Harris has at least a 50-50 chance in North Carolina. I would say, as an aside, I talked about it being a close election. If Joe Biden had not dropped out, it would not have been a close election. Joe Biden had no chance to win. I thought that was true even before the June 27th debate. I also think he's been a pretty good president. But I think the age issue was just disqualifying as far as enough voters were concerned. And I think Harris has provided an infusion of energy and excitement and a sense among Democrats, hey, we got a shot. We really have a chance. And that's made a big difference. And she's run a pretty darn good campaign ever since she announced, which I guess was, what, the 22nd of July. So I come to the other big state, Pennsylvania, which I think both sides think will really be important. If Trump loses Pennsylvania, it's hard to see how he wins 270 electoral votes. Not impossible, but hard. If she loses it, she has to win Nevada and North Carolina. She can do that, but you know, it's not a gimme. And if you look at Pennsylvania, it has totally flipped from where it was 25, 30 years ago. And it shows you the changing nature of American politics. Static analysis is always a problem. 30 years ago, in 1988, Michael Dukakis carried all those working class western counties, the old steel towns and coal mines, and the Scrantons and the Wilkesboroughs up in northeast Pennsylvania. He was hardly a cultural warrior, but he carried them decisively. And then the Philadelphia suburbs, Montgomery County, Chester, Bucks, Delaware, fluent. In 1988, George H.W. Bush carried those with 60%. That has flipped. That has totally flipped. And the working class areas of Pennsylvania, the Northeast, Washington, Westmoreland, Butler counties in the West, they're going to vote for Trump. How big? The margins matter. And those Philadelphia suburbs those 4 suburbs, which cast more votes, by the way, than Philadelphia and Pittsburgh put together. They provided the margin for Biden last time. She has to run up a huge margin among those voters. Now, why have they changed so much? It's become more diverse. I grew up in that section, and there weren't a lot of people of color, to put it mildly. There are more now. It has to do with education. One of the great divides in American politics today is education. Again, a reversal of 30 years ago. Non-college educated whites tend to vote rather decisively Republican, and college-educated whites vote Democratic. So that's what those 4 counties are, and margins matter. People say, well, gosh, that's her base, those counties, but she also has to cut into his margins in places like Lackawanna, places like Beaver County in the West. And he, conversely, has to cut into hers in the suburbs. She'll win Philadelphia. It was my colleague, James Carville, who one time described Pennsylvania as Philadelphia and Pittsburgh with Alabama in the middle with no black people. He actually said Paoli and Penn Hills, but it was the same thing. And there's truth to that. And she, he has to cut into her margins. Philadelphia is heavily Democratic, but ever since Barack Obama left office, black turnout has been very mediocre, not just in Philadelphia, but in Detroit and a number of other cities, where she energized more of those voters. It's not at all clear right now. I think this election has huge consequences. I write a column. I do a show with James Carville. Unlike my wife, I don't pretend to be detached. I have to. She is, really. I'm not. I think the consequences of this election are profound. I don't know what kind of a candidate Kamala Harris or what kind of a president she'd be. Frankly, she wouldn't have been my first choice, but I do know what kind of a president Donald Trump would be, and it petrifies me. I think he would be far more effective than he was in the first term because he's learned. He's learned how to bypass rules and the rule of law. And one of Judy's more fascinating interviews in her series was with Michael Ludig, who was one of the most distinguished conservative judges on the appeals court. He was almost named to the Supreme Court by President Bush. So his conservative credentials are impeccable. And he said, what's at stake is very simple, democracy. He doesn't think that democracy as we know it can survive 4 years of Trump. I don't know if it's that extreme, but there's things that are disturbing. He was in Wisconsin yesterday, and he began his speech by saying that Kamala Harris was born mentally retarded. I mean, honest to God, Nixon and Kennedy had really, really, tough debates about things like Quamoy Matsu. I don't know where they were, but there was a big debate. But about the role of government and taxes and regulation and courts and everything. But it wasn't that kind of a dialogue. The same with Reagan and Carter or Obama and McCain. You remember in the 2008 campaign, there was, I think it was in Wisconsin, someone stood up at a McCain rally and said, Barack Obama is a Muslim radical. And McCain stopped him and said, no, that's not true. I disagree with him, but he is a very decent, honorable man. Can you imagine Donald Trump saying that about anyone? So I do think the stakes, it's not just the court or things of that sort, but it's really matters a great deal. On issues, and I'll stop after this, I think that the economy has been a Republican advantage. I think she's narrowed that. She has to keep narrowing it. The Republicans have a clear advantage on immigration. People are upset about the perception that there is a unchecked border. I think Biden didn't respond quickly enough to that. She has an answer, which she offered in Arizona 2 days ago that there is a bipartisan bill that's pretty tough. It doesn't make some of the immigration advocates happy, but I think it's something she probably has to do politically. But it's still going to advantage Republicans. And finally, abortion. Abortion is a huge issue. And from 1973, when Roe was first adopted, until 2022, abortion would cut both ways. If one side seemed to be getting the advantage, it would politically advantage the other side. And if it helped any overall, it tended to help the anti-abortion because the passion, the intensity was a bit greater there. But once the court took away that right, I think ever since then, the dynamics have switched dramatically. My friend Carville called me the day after, maybe it was 2 or 3 days after the court decision, and said, Kansas is having a referendum, and I'm going to Kansas tomorrow. And I said, James, Kansas, come on. He said, you watch. Kansas voted 57% pro-choice. Ohio, Kentucky. There was a district up in New York, Suffolk County, where that distinguished statesman George Santos, George had to take a leave of absence for some reason, Judy, and there was a race to succeed him, and the pollster for the Democrat was a good friend. I said, Jim, what's going to happen? He said, I think we're going to win by 3 or 4. I feel pretty confident. They won by 8. And I said, what happened? He said, abortion. It just brought people out. So those are the dynamics of the race. I think you are going to be nervous right through, not November 5th, but probably November 8th or 10th, whatever. But the stakes are huge. So with that, shall we take questions?
Yes, yeah, we're open for questions. Maybe a microphone. We have a microphone, I see.
If you have a question, please come to the microphone so that the folks who are online can see you as well as hear you.
There you go.
My question is for Judy Woodruff. Have you ever thought of coming to D.C. and asking the D.C. residents what they think?
Not really. Thank you for asking. D.C. residents count, even though our votes don't count in the Congress. They do count for president, and we know, as Al said, it's the electoral system. We've been, as you can imagine, we've been primarily focusing on those states where there are significant divisions, and so where we can go in and talk to people across the political divide. You could say many, many great things about the District of Columbia. One of them is that we are predictable when it comes to politics. I think we're 90%, are we 90-something percent Democrat? But Al and I love the District of Columbia. I've lived here for 47 years. I love the district. Can't imagine living anywhere else. But no, I probably won't be reporting from. Having said that, when I go to the Pew Research Center, there in D.C., many of the experts we've interviewed over time, we've sat down in their offices in D.C. Thank you.
Great question. I'm Deborah Kennedy. I'm the Executive Director of the National Coalition for Literacy. We are the umbrella advocacy organization for adult education and family literacy in the United States. And now I gotta tell you, I am nervous all the time about education in particular.
Yeah.
There are 43 million people in the United States who cannot read above the third grade level. Federal funding for adult education served in 2023, 1.1 million of them. That means a whole bunch of folks who aren't getting educated. Now we have the Heritage Foundation talking about eliminating
Thank you so much, and thank you for the work you're doing through your organization. It's so important and so underappreciated and frankly so underreported on. The NewsHour for a long time what were you going to say?
We can fix that.
I'm proud to say the NewsHour has done some remarkable reporting on education. But to your point, I have to be honest, people do not bring up education very much as we ask them what's on your mind. They most often bring up the economy when we ask them what's top of mind as you think about this election. A number of them are bringing up reproductive rights, abortion, as Al mentioned, immigration, and sometimes the environment, not education very often, which I think is deeply unfortunate because you're right. The two candidates, the two parties' approaches to public education are very, very different. We all know that education is, the control is at the local level, state level, and less so at the federal, national level. So it's not as, I think, uppermost in people's minds when you think about the presidential. There was a time not so long ago when choice was a very contentious issue, and it still is in the minds of, there are many Republicans who believe we need to take money from, as you know, from the public school coffers and allow people to send their children to this private school of their choice, including religious schools. So there is a big divide between the parties, and yet it's not getting very much attention.
Judy interviewed David Rubenstein the other day, who's written a book about presidents. It's really a fascinating book. And he made the point that for an immigrant to be a citizen, they have to pass a civics test. There are 10 questions, and I think they have to get 6 or 7 right. How many branches of government are there and things of that sort? And about 90% pass. When it was given to others, just ordinary citizens, the marks were much lower. We don't have. Now, we have a junior senator from Alabama who came in and talked about the 3 branches of government, the executive, and the legislative and the congressional. I think education matters and civic education matters.
Thank you. If you all could just speak right into the microphone so we can hear you. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thomas Crumbs, I'm a Foreign Service officer on tour at headquarters with the Department of Commerce. Can you speak a little bit in the context of what's been happening over the last year, in particular the last week, how foreign policy might affect the election, in particular the voting rights?
Well, I think that certainly you will see next Tuesday night a great divide on Ukraine. J.D. Vance opposes helping Ukraine, and Tim Walz has the same position as Harris and Biden. I don't think it's going to matter a whole lot, but I think at least it'll be drawn there. The one that scares me is the Middle East. I have a very cynical view of Bibi Netanyahu. I think he, A, wants to stay in office, to stay out of jail, and I think, B, he wants to help Donald Trump, and I think, C, he would like a war between the United States and Iran, because the United States could take out things that they can't. I think all would be terrible for America, and I love Israel. I think they've had some of the great people I've ever met in public life over there. I mean, Rabin and many, many others. But I think the danger of what Bibi may do in the next 5 weeks is considerable, and that really could affect the presidential outcome.
Can you both please speak to what you believe will happen after the election? When both sides now, we know, of course, the Republicans are saying that they will contest anything that they don't win. But we've heard that also from some Democrats, and I would like to know what you think might happen, because it may be we don't know who won.
I'll let Al principally answer. In the course of our reporting, we've talked to experts on extremism to try to understand how that has is a thread through American life that has grown. I mean, we went to Oklahoma City to talk about the roots of the Oklahoma City bombing. That was a domestic terrorist, and how those beliefs, anti-government, virulently anti-government beliefs have persisted and grown. And of course, we saw it on January the 6th. There are genuine concerns about what could happen after the election if former President Trump is not reelected. And at this point, no one knows for sure. But it's fair to say there's deep concern about it.
I think we already see things that were not there 4 years ago. In states like North Carolina, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Republicans have filed suit after suit after suit to disqualify voters, to try to set up a potentially different system for even choosing electors. In North Carolina, for instance, if you're a student at UNC, your ID is digital. I mean, that's the modern world, right? I don't understand it, but that's the modern world. My wife has tried to teach me how to use a digital plane ticket. I mean, I want to have my ticket, but no, she gets it on her.
It's called a boarding pass. I mean.
Oh, the stories we could tell. But they just, the Republicans brought a suit, and they now said that you can't use that digital ID for voting. I mean, that really is kind of, I mean, that takes, if you're a UNC student, presumably many of them, I don't know how big it would be, but they would tend to vote more Democratic. But there are more insidious suits that are being filed. Pennsylvania has they send in absentee ballots, and they have what they call a secretive thing in it, which, protects anybody from tinkering with them. It's in an envelope, it's sealed, it's identified, and it has an address. And they have now, the Republicans are ruling, and they've gotten one favorable court ruling, that if you don't have the exact address, the ballot doesn't count. So if you send it in on October 20th and you write October 21st, your ballot's thrown out. But that's just the child's play. I mean, they are ready to challenge this election. I shouldn't say this. I'm less worried about the violence we saw last time, and far more worried about radically changing the election. If again, to pick on North Carolina, if Harris were to win North Carolina by 25,000 votes, it is not inconceivable. The way the law works now, the Secretary of State sends that vote to the governor, who then sends it to Washington for the December 11th convening of the electors. It is not inconceivable that the very heavily Republican legislature would say, we think the election wasn't run right, and we're going to take it over, we're going to send our own electors. And that's going to create a dangerous situation.
Good morning. We've heard for years that the media sources were big influences, Fox News versus others, and I followed your footsteps to figure in the communities you've been going to, and I looked at other networks conducting the similar focus groups, and I don't see Fox News there or the New York Times there. I see ignorance. And this stunning example was the Teamsters Union had a group of, quote, undecided voters. And these were mostly white, but also some people of color. And they didn't know anything. They didn't read anything. And is that the loss of the local newspaper that you were referring to? So is this a bigger problem than the right-wing and left-wing conspiracies?
Well, I'm loath to go to a place. I don't ever want to be in a place where I believe people with less education are less loyal, less American, don't want all good things for the country. So I'm not going to go there, but what we know, and what Alice said, is there clearly is a divide. There has been a divide, and it's a growing divide. We're seeing it in this election, particularly among white Americans, college-educated versus not college-educated. There are more Americans, percentage of Americans who are getting a college degree. I think is it 40%, Al? What is it?
Up to 40.
Around 40. It's creeping up, the percentage of Americans getting a college degree, but the majority of Americans, as you know, do not have a college degree. And we do see a clear split. It's much of it is as women are gravitating toward Harris and the Democrats, men in particular without a college degree are strongly gravitating toward Donald Trump. I don't want to believe that they are not informed, that they're ignorant. I think my speculation is that it has to do with feelings of economic insecurity, with a sense of I don't know, the macho presentation that he makes, and other aspects of his personality, his persona. And so I don't want to go to a place where I say the educated are right and the less educated are wrong. But there is clearly at this moment, and there has been, a divide between college-educated and less than college degree over where we are. I hope that isn't something that continues to widen.
I would just add, you can't explain Trump's appeal without talking about race. He plays the race card every chance he gets, and I think there are a number of good people, essentially, who feel threatened. America's changing. It used to be that they were the majority, and now they see black people and brown people and Asian people, and they think it's not their America. They're wrong, but they think it's not their America, and I think Trump plays to that brilliantly. And I just think race has been an American story since the 18th century, and I think it continues to be, and I think that it has an impact on the vote.
Given the importance of North Carolina to this election, what impact, if any, do you think the weather disaster this week will have on the results?
It's a really good question. I don't know, obviously. We don't know exactly. Most of the damage, I think, has been done in western North Carolina and Asheville and around there. Those tend to be, not Asheville the city, but the rest of the area tends to be heavily Republican. North Carolina has a fabulous governor, and my guess is that Roy Cooper will move quickly. Whether that helps Democrats, I don't know. And also Florida. I don't know what difference it'll make in Florida. We always tend to think those things are going to make a bigger difference than they actually do. But I think it's hard to say. I think there's enough time that I can't, as devastating and tragic as the losses are, I think that it's not going to prevent people from voting over the next 5 weeks.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
being here with us this morning. Thank all of you for engaging in this conversation. Can we give Judy and Al a hand of gratitude?
You know one thing? I have one thing. I didn't come back to one thing. I'll take 20 seconds where I said I would rather have Harris's hand than Trump's hand. I think she has more potential to grow. She has to do well, but she has more potential to grow. And I suspect that the Trump low-propensity voters that made the difference. It's why he pulled the huge upset in 2016 and actually did better than expected, even in 2020. I think some of those voters are kind of fed up and less enamored. So again, I'd rather have her hand, but you're going to be nervous every day for the next 37 days.
Please
Thank
vote.
you.